They said a girl like me could never catch a billionaire's attention. I was just another face in his corporate empire. But when I walked into that boardroom and challenged him in front of everyone, everything changed. He didn't just notice me, he became obsessed. This is my story. If you've ever felt invisible or told you weren't good enough, stay with me. This story will show you that sometimes the most unexpected love stories are the most powerful ones. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before everything changed. Picture this, a 26-year-old black woman waking up every morning at 5:30, not because I wanted to, but because I had to catch 2 buses just to make it to my cubicle on the 42nd floor of Morrison Industries. I was what they called a junior analyst, which sounds fancy until you realize it meant I was basically a glorified data entry clerk, making $38,000 a year in a city where rent alone cost me $2,000. Every evening, I'd come home to my tiny studio apartment, exhausted, only to spend hours on the phone with insurance companies, fighting for my mother's chemotherapy treatments. She'd been battling breast cancer for 2 years, and the medical bills were drowning us both. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, which was really just a folding card table I'd bought from a thrift store, spreading out bills like some twisted game of solitaire. Rent, utilities, Mum's medication, groceries if I was lucky. Some nights, dinner was just ramen noodles and whatever hope I could scrape together. At work, I might as well have been a ghost. I'd walk into meetings with ideas that could save the company millions, but somehow my voice never seemed to carry the same weight as my colleagues. You know that feeling when you speak up and everyone looks right through you? Like your words are just background noise. That was my daily reality. I watched less qualified people get promoted over me, month after month. My boss, Janet, would smile that fake smile and tell me to be patient, that my time would come. But patience doesn't pay medical bills, and hope doesn't cure cancer. I felt invisible, forgotten, like I was living in black and white, while everyone else got to experience life in full color. If you worked at Morrison Industries, you knew exactly when Marcus Morrison was in the building. It wasn't just the expensive suits, or the way his Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floors. It was something else entirely, this energy that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of every room he entered. People would literally scatter when they heard he was coming down the hall. I watched grown men stumble over their words when he asked simple questions. Marcus Morrison wasn't just rich, he was generational wealth rich. The kind of money that builds hospitals and has university buildings named after your family. At 34, he'd already doubled his father's empire, turning Morrison Industries from a successful company into an unstoppable force. Forbes called him ruthless. The Wall Street Journal called him brilliant. His employees called him terrifying. I'd seen him maybe 3 times in my 2 years at the company, always from a distance. He was tall, probably 6'2", with this presence that commanded attention without him even trying. Dark hair perfectly styled, jaw that looked like it was carved from marble. But it was his eyes that everyone talked about, these piercing grey eyes that seemed to see right through whatever mask you were wearing straight to your soul. The morning that changed my entire life started like any other Tuesday. I was running late because the second bus broke down, and I practically sprinted to the 42nd floor, my cheap heels clicking frantically against the marble. When I burst through the conference room doors, I expected to see the usual suspects, middle management discussing quarterly projections. Instead, I walked straight into a nightmare. Marcus Morrison was standing at the head of our conference table, and every single person in that room looked like they wanted to disappear. Our regional director, Mr. Patterson, was stumbling through a presentation about our latest client acquisition strategy, and it was going terribly wrong. The numbers didn't add up, the projections were completely unrealistic, and worst of all, they were about to promise a major client something we absolutely could not deliver. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, watching this disaster unfold, knowing that if we followed through with this plan, we'd lose not just this client, but probably 3 others who'd hear about our failure. And that's when I did something that surprised even me. I raised my hand and said, "Excuse me, but this entire approach is fundamentally flawed." Every head in that room turned toward me, including those devastating grey eyes that had haunted my co-workers' nightmares. The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. You could literally hear people breathing. Marcus Morrison looked at me for what felt like an eternity, those grey eyes studying me like I was some fascinating specimen he'd never encountered before. Then, he did something that shocked everyone in that room. He smiled. Not a polite corporate smile, but a genuine, almost amused expression that transformed his entire face. "Go on," he said, his voice deeper than I'd expected. "Tell me exactly what's wrong with our approach." So I did. For the next 10 minutes, I broke down every flaw in their strategy, offered 3 alternative solutions, and backed everything up with data I'd been collecting for months. Data that no one had ever bothered to ask me about before. When I finished, the room was still silent, but this time it felt different. Marcus was nodding slowly, and I caught something in his expression that I couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe? Or curiosity? "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "Maya Johnson." He repeated my name like he was testing how it sounded. "Maya Johnson. Well, Maya, it seems like you're the only person in this room who actually understands what we're dealing with here." 3 days later, I got a call from his executive assistant requesting my presence in Mr. Morrison's office. Walking into Marcus Morrison's private office felt like entering another universe. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, and everything was sleek, expensive, and intimidating. But what caught me off guard wasn't the luxury. It was how he looked sitting behind that massive mahogany desk. Less intimidating, somehow. More human. "Maya," he said, standing up when I entered. That surprised me. Billionaire CEOs don't usually stand for junior analysts. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and I noticed he'd loosened his tie slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said in that meeting, and I have a proposition for you." For the next hour, he outlined a special project, a complete overhaul of our client acquisition strategy that would require someone with fresh eyes and sharp instincts, someone like me. The pay increase alone would solve my mum's medical bills overnight. But here's what really shocked me. He asked for my opinion on everything. Not once, not twice, but constantly throughout our conversation. As I was leaving, he said something that made my heart skip. "Maya, I have to ask, why haven't I heard your voice before? Someone with your insights shouldn't be invisible." The way he said it with genuine curiosity and what almost sounded like regret made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't invisible to everyone after all. The whispers started almost immediately. Within a week of my first project meeting with Marcus, the entire office was buzzing with speculation. "Did you see Maya going into Mr. Morrison's office again? What does he want with her? She must be sleeping with him." That last one hit like a punch to the gut every single time I heard it. The gossip followed me everywhere. In the elevator, at the coffee machine, even in the bathroom stalls where people thought I couldn't hear them. My colleagues, who had barely acknowledged my existence for 2 years, suddenly had plenty to say about me. Some were envious, others were outright hostile. But none of them considered that maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be there based on my abilities. Things got worse when a photo of Marcus and me leaving a late meeting appeared on some celebrity gossip blog. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO's Mystery Woman." The comments section was a nightmare of racist assumptions and cruel speculation. People dissected everything from my appearance to my background, making judgments about who I was and why I didn't belong in his world. My mother called me that night, worried. "Baby, are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into?" Even she could see the storm brewing around us, everything came crashing down on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. I was sitting in Marcus's office, going over quarterly projections, when his assistant knocked and entered with a grim expression. "Mr. Morrison, there's been a situation," she said, glancing nervously at me. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting." What followed was 2 hours of pure hell. Someone had leaked details about our working relationship to the press, but they'd twisted the story into something ugly and scandalous. The headlines were brutal: "Billionaire's diversity hire scandal," and "Is this why Morrison Industries stock is falling?" They painted me as some opportunistic woman who'd seduced her way to the top, and Marcus as a man who'd compromised his company's integrity for a fling. When Marcus returned from that board meeting, he looked like a different person. The confident, powerful man I'd come to know seemed diminished, exhausted. "Maya, we need to talk," he said, and I knew from his tone that my world was about to collapse again. He sat across from me, not behind his desk this time, but the distance between us felt infinite. "The board has concerns," he began, and I could see him struggling with every word. "About the optics of our relationship. They think it's affecting the company's reputation, our stock price, our credibility with clients." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "They want me to reassign you to another department, limit our interactions to what's absolutely necessary." I felt something inside me break. "And what do you want, Marcus?" I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw pain in those grey eyes. But when he spoke, his words cut deeper than any knife. I think they might be right. Maybe we got too close too fast. Maybe it's better if we step back." That night, I went home and typed up my resignation letter. 2 years of fighting to be seen, acknowledged, respected, and I was back to being invisible. Worse than invisible, I was a scandal, a mistake, a problem to be solved. For 3 months, I disappeared completely. I moved back in with my mother, took a job at a small consulting firm across town, and tried to rebuild my life from scratch. I deleted all my social media, changed my phone number, and avoided anywhere I might run into anyone from Morrison Industries. I thought I was healing, moving on, finding peace. I was wrong. The first sign that Marcus was looking for me came through my mother. She called me at work one Tuesday, confused and a little worried. "Maya, baby, there's a man here asking about you. Says his name is Marcus Morrison. He's got flowers and he looks real upset." I told her to send him away, that I didn't want to see him. But according to my mother, he came back the next day and the next, each time asking if he could just talk to me for 5 minutes. Then came the letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my mother's house. In it, Marcus poured out everything he'd been too scared to say before. He wrote about the sleepless nights since I'd left, how the company was thriving financially, but felt empty without my insights, how he'd realized that choosing his board's approval over me was the biggest mistake of his life. He wrote about the loneliness that his wealth couldn't fix, and how I was the first person who'd ever seen him as more than just his bank account. The most powerful part of the letter was the last paragraph. "I know I hurt you, Maya, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I've fired 3 board members who spoke against you, and I've restructured the entire company to ensure this never happens again. Not because I want you back as an employee, but because you were right about everything, and I was a coward for not standing up for what was right. You deserved better from me, and if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you believed I could be." The day I finally agreed to see Marcus again was 6 months after I'd walked out of Morrison Industries. I chose a small cafe across town, somewhere neutral where neither of us had history. I arrived early. My hands shaking as I ordered coffee, I knew I wouldn't be able to drink. When he walked through that door, my breath caught in my throat. He looked different. Thinner, more tired, but somehow more real than the polished executive I'd known. He sat across from me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he did something that broke my heart all over again. He started crying. Not dramatic tears, just quiet, steady streams down his cheeks that he didn't even try to wipe away. "Maya," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I failed you in every way that mattered." For the next 2 hours, he told me everything. How he'd realized within days of my resignation that he was in love with me. How he'd spent months working with therapists to understand why he'd chosen fear over love. Why he'd let other people's opinions matter more than his own heart. He told me about the board members he'd fired, the policies he'd changed, the foundation he'd started in my name to support women of color in business. But what got to me wasn't the grand gestures or the money he'd spent trying to make things right. It was when he said, "I don't care if I lose everything, Maya. The company, the money, the reputation, none of it means anything without you. I'd rather be broke and in love with you than be the richest man in the world and alone." He reached across the table, not to touch me, but to place something between us. It wasn't a ring or expensive jewelry. It was a simple handwritten note that read, "Maya Johnson is the smartest person I've ever met, and I'm honored to know her." "I wrote that the day after our first meeting," he said. "I've carried it in my wallet every day since. Even when I was too much of a coward to tell you how I felt, I knew you were extraordinary. I knew you were the one." Looking at that worn piece of paper with my name on it, written in his careful handwriting, something inside me finally cracked open. All the walls I'd built, all the anger I'd held on to, all the reasons I'd convinced myself we could never work, they started crumbling. Because this man, this powerful, terrifying billionaire, had been carrying a note about me in his wallet for over a year. He'd seen me when I couldn't even see myself. "Marcus," I said, my voice shaking, "I can't pretend this doesn't terrify me. The world we'd be stepping into, the judgment, the constant scrutiny. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for all of that." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then we'll face it together. And when you're not feeling strong enough, I'll be strong for both of us. When I'm doubting myself, you can remind me who I am. That's what partnerships are supposed to be, right?" The next 6 months weren't easy. Dating a billionaire as a black woman meant every restaurant, every event, every simple coffee date became a statement. People stared, whispered, took pictures. Some of Marcus's old friends made it clear they didn't approve. My own family worried about my safety, about the attention, about whether I was setting myself up for heartbreak all over again. But Marcus had changed, fundamentally and completely. When reporters asked invasive questions about our relationship, he shut them down immediately. When business associates made racist comments, thinking he'd laugh along, he ended those relationships on the spot. He learned to braid my hair after chemotherapy treatments, left my mother too weak to do it herself. He sat with me in hospital waiting rooms and never once acted like he had somewhere more important to be. The most beautiful thing was watching him discover parts of my world he'd never seen before. Sunday dinners at my mother's house, where we ate off mismatched plates and talked about everything except money. Community events in my neighborhood, where his presence initially caused a stir, but where he eventually became just Marcus, the guy who helped set up chairs and always brought too much food. He learned that love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about showing up consistently and authentically, even when it's inconvenient. The proposal wasn't what anyone expected, least of all me. It happened on a random Tuesday evening, 8 months after we'd started dating again. I was at my mother's house, helping her organize her medications, when Marcus showed up with grocery bags and that slightly nervous energy he got when he was planning something. "Thought you might need some help," he said, rolling up his sleeves like he belonged there. We spent the evening cooking dinner together, the three of us moving around my mother's tiny kitchen like we'd been doing it for years. My mom was having a good day, the new treatment was working, and she was more herself than she'd been in months. After dinner, as we sat around that same folding table, where I used to spread out bills and worry about the future, Marcus cleared his throat, Mrs. Johnson, he said, turning to my mother, with a respect that made my heart flutter, I'd like to ask your permission for something. My mother raised an eyebrow, but she was smiling. Maya is the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I've ever known, and I know she gets that from you. I'd like to ask her to marry me, but I wanted your blessing first. My mother looked at him for a long moment, then at me, then back at him. Do you love my daughter? She asked. More than my own life, he replied without hesitation. Will you protect her heart? With everything I have. Will you see her for who she really is, not who the world says she should be? Every day for the rest of my life. My mother nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing, son. That's when he got down on one knee, right there in my mother's kitchen, and pulled out the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. Not because it was expensive, but because it was perfect. Maya Johnson, he said, his voice shaking, you saved me in every way a person can be saved. Will you marry me? If this story inspired you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're worthy of extraordinary love. Subscribe for more real stories about overcoming the odds. What's your most unexpected love story? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, never let anyone convince you that you're not enough. 1.